Good morning and welcome. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Before we get started, please note that you will be muted throughout today's webinar, but if you have questions, we encourage you to submit them using the chat box or questions box. You also can raise your hand and I will unmute you and you can ask your question out loud. Please note the recording will be sent to you following today's webinar, so you'll have a chance to review this information. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Dr. Lawrence to get us started.
Thank you, Jasmine. Good morning and welcome, and thanks to all of our participants. This is the third webinar in a three-part series on rethinking teacher workforce solutions. Before we begin, I'd like to remind all participants to stay muted until you are ready to ask a question. Please utilize the chat as well to ask questions. SREB is a nonpartisan, nonprofit established as an interstate compact in 1948 with 16 southern states. We serve to help states in three ways. One is analyzing and publishing data, research, and policy recommendations, convening and engaging educators and policymakers to have difficult, productive conversations. And finally, by supporting action that states, districts, and schools need and want to take to improve policy and practice. At SREB, we serve states on many issues and lines of work that span K through doctoral education, as well as workforce entry and workforce solutions. We have a team that leads the teacher workforce policy work, connecting K-12 and higher education research, policy, and convening of leaders on key education human capital strategies. Our team includes yours truly, Stevie Lawrence, Megan Boren, who serves as our program specialist with Education Human Capital Strategies, and Jessica Snellings, our research analyst in the Office of Post-Secondary Education, who supports this work. This morning, we have three panelists. First, I'd like to welcome Dr. Cory Murphy, Executive Director of the Office of Teaching and Learning at the Mississippi Department of Education. Welcome, Cory. Our next panelist is Dr. Robyn Miller, Chief Deputy Superintendent of Public Instruction at the Oklahoma State Department of Education and a member of the recently concluded Oklahoma Educator Supply and Demand Network. Welcome, Robyn. And finally, welcome to the panel this morning, our third panelist, Representative Terri Collins, who is a member of the Alabama House of Representatives from the 8th District and a member of the recently concluded Alabama Teacher Quality and Quantity Roundtable. With that, I will turn it over to Megan.
Thanks, Stevie. Thanks to our panelists. Excited to have you guys on this morning for our third webinar. For those who have joined us before, you've heard a little bit about our work. For those who this is your first webinar joining us in the series, welcome. And just like to let you guys know that at SREB, we've been working for several years thinking about the growing issues with teacher shortages and how to help states improve the teacher pipeline. Our work really centers around focusing on holistic problem solving to these issues. There's many reasons, many different kinds of policies, and of course, many different occurrences over the last decade or so that have been leading to our current teacher shortage problem. And so we're trying to help states think about these all together and take these problems through an approach of seeing the forest, if you will, rather than just taking on individual trees. Through our research in this work, we do have many briefs and reports and things published online, and we're pleased to keep providing that kind of service to our states. But we also have been pulling together our states in roundtables Education Human Capital Roundtables. We're really glad that we've been able to work with 4 states so far in this endeavor for the last few years, pulling together collaborative groups of leaders in the state, as well as practitioners, state agency folks, and different kinds of advocate groups to really talk about teacher shortage problems and answer some of these really big questions that people have around the subject matter. And we're of course pleased that our 3 panelists come from 3 of our roundtable states, and you'll get to hear more about some of their really great discussions and ideas that are coming out of those roundtables. If you've attended our first 2 webinars in the series, you'll recall that we talked a lot about pathways into teaching in our first webinar and teacher preparation, some different innovations that are going on to help make sure that states are thinking about how to recruit folks into the profession earlier, how to give them more practice and experience in the profession earlier on, as well as great partnerships with local schools and across different agencies to provide new pathways. Our second webinar focused a great deal on teacher licensure, and that being kind of the major policy vessel to govern who can teach in our states, and some innovation on licensure coming out of North Carolina and out of Alabama. And today we're really going to focus in on teacher supports and teacher compensation and salary schedules. It ties very closely with the teacher licensure work, especially in North Carolina and Alabama, and up and coming in Mississippi as well. So you'll hear some overlapping themes from our last webinar, but we'll dive in a little bit more on the supports and the salary schedules today. First, you'll hear from my colleague who will introduce the topic, and then we'll have each of our 3 panelists talk about some ideas coming out of their states. And then we'll wrap up today by featuring some information from the new SREB teacher compensation dashboard. So Jessica, take us away.
Good morning, everybody. So one of the most talked about issues from the past few years is that the teaching profession is in decline. And regrettably, that is right. The reality is that the teaching profession is facing big issues, and unfortunately, they're being exacerbated by our ongoing COVID pandemic. The current generation of high school students seems to be uninterested in teaching as a career, and there has been a rise in early career teachers leaving the profession within their first 5 years. When we look at teaching in comparison with highly sought after careers, one thing becomes clear. Teaching lacks the support and pay present in these other professions. The fact that these are missing is supported by high school students citing low pay as the top reason they don't want to enter the teaching career, and early career teachers citing lack of support as one of the top reasons they leave the profession. To reverse the decline of the teaching profession, it is important to elevate teaching to the same level as other respected careers. It is paramount that all jobs, including teaching, have a decent, livable wage. It is unacceptable that some of our teachers must work another job to make ends meet, or that teachers with the average state pay in 4 states can qualify for government assistance programs if they are the head of the household for a family of 4 or more. In addition to decent pay, teaching should mimic other professions that have a required support system. The support system not only will help our teachers feel more comfortable in their role, but it will facilitate growth and learning in a profession that is centered around allowing students the ability to grow and learn. To deal with some of these issues, SREB has researched the most successful strategies to support teachers and how the teaching profession is affected by current salary and compensation practices, both in recruiting and retaining teachers. One of the top ways to help support and retain early career teachers is to provide them with quality mentoring from an effective teacher. A research review by Dr. Richard Ingersoll has shown that mentoring has a positive impact on 3 tested outcomes: teacher commitment and retention, teacher classroom instructional practices, and student achievement, All three are key pieces to reversing the decline of the profession. Support through mentorship allows early career teachers to learn from their more experienced peers and explore different teaching methods while being guided through them. Research from the Brookings Institute performed in Washington State has shown that the average teacher mentored by a highly effective teacher, that is 2 standard deviations above average value added, begins their career with the same effectiveness as the average third-year teacher in the state. Imagine if all teachers were afforded the opportunity of mentorship from a highly effective teacher. Not only would the early career teacher benefit, but so would the students they teach. Mentorship not only helps early career teachers, but it allows for career trajectory of more experienced, effective teachers. Research has shown that collective leadership, like the opportunity culture model, in schools helps retain excellent teachers and is proven to increase overall school success. The North Carolina Roundtable presented an idea to their state board of education that is a holistic plan to transform the profession, and it includes codifying the requirement that every early career teacher with an initial license will be assigned a mentor teacher to coach and assist their growth in practice. The mentor teachers must qualify for and receive an advanced teaching license in adult leadership, as well as meet other district requirements to be hired in this leading role. These advanced teachers would continue to teach part of the time to stay connected to the students and their practice, a key element in successful mentorship that yields better results than non-practicing mentors. The North Carolina Roundtable is promoting a statewide salary schedule change that includes the idea that advanced teachers who show greater effectiveness and take on additional duties will be paid a higher salary. Mentorship is not the only tool to support and grow teachers. Professional development opportunities are also important for teachers to grow in practice and become a more effective teacher. For professional development to be truly supportive, it is important to make sure that the opportunities are individualized and not just a time and seat requirement. Using individualized, interactive professional development will help teachers grow and better their craft. The North Carolina Roundtable's vision for transforming the teaching profession, as shown in our last webinar, also includes policy strategies to incentivize individual professional development and to create a consumer report to help guide teachers to the best quality PD. Mentorship and appropriate individualized professional development are proven retention strategies for both early career and advanced credentialed teachers. SREB recognizes that education budgets have suffered since the Great Recession and continue to suffer from the fallout from COVID-19. It is important to recognize that some innovative incentive strategies can help teachers feel supported and respected. Some low or no cost strategies to support teachers include partnering with local businesses. These companies look at partnerships with schools as a way to invest in their future workforce. Another low or no cost strategy is supporting teacher well-being by providing them time and space for exercise, to practice mindfulness or meditation, and to form support groups. Another well-being strategy is to seek out partnerships with local or virtual therapists to provide counseling services to teachers. There are also some moderate cost strategies that may help your teachers feel supported and respected. Maintaining or returning planning periods allows teachers to plan ahead, consult colleagues, email parents, and catch up on paperwork. Another moderate cost strategy is providing bonuses for teachers in advanced teaching roles. These bonuses would be for teachers who help lead from their classrooms, whether it is through previously mentioned mentorship roles or through increased reach to students. Another moderate cost strategy is reducing teachers' role in direct student support. Teachers are asked to do many tasks on top of their teaching duties, like hall monitoring, bus duty, and lunch duty. State and district leaders could look at reassessing school budgets to hire support staff to take away some of these duties from teachers and allow them to focus on teaching students and mastering content. Now we'd love to hear from 3 panelists representing the other 3 roundtables on their ideas and work to better support and compensate teachers. First, we'd like to turn to Dr. Cory Murphy from the Mississippi Department of Education. Cory?
Mr. Murphy, we're having a hard time hearing you. I see your mic is unmuted. You may want to check that on your device. The mic is unmuted as well. Okay. Can you hear me now? I can. Thank you so much. Awesome. I apologize for that. Good morning again to each of you, and a special thank you to the SREB team for providing the opportunity to share this morning. To not prolong the time, I'd like to dive right in. And so to start, I'd like to provide some context as to how we arrived at the point of development and piloting of some initiatives that I'll share here today. And so in 2018, we began seriously exploring and employing efforts to address the shortage of access to licensed teachers we long faced in our state. And I emphasize the lack of licensed teachers or access to licensed teachers, in that in our time of engagement with education shareholders across the state, we've found that there really isn't a shortage of individuals who desire to serve our children as part of the education profession. Rather, there were many who couldn't meet certain requirements for gaining entree into the existing pathways to educator licensure, and as a result, couldn't obtain full state certification. And so as we reviewed all policies and processes that were at play during that time, we found that over the years, we had adopted a reactive approach to policy development and implementation that was often driven by federal or state laws handed down to the agency. And so we often attempted to force generation after generation to prospective educators to enter a pipeline that didn't include components that were I guess neither attractive, relevant, nor supportive. And so in taking this approach, we soon discovered that we would not be able to achieve our vision of creating, in partnership with education shareholders, a talent pool of diverse, culturally responsive, and highly effective educators through innovative pathways that elevate the profession and expand educator growth. And so our then reactive approach to educator workforce legislation resulted in a leaky pipeline wherein we were losing potential educators between high school and college throughout our educator preparation programs. We were losing them in navigating difficult to grasp licensure requirements and in long-term retention. And so this is particularly the case for our educators of color and in high poverty, high minority communities. And so as our educator workforce becomes predominantly millennials and Gen Zers, we found that it was necessary to move away from forcing individuals down a narrow pipeline and provide innovative on-ramps and off-ramps to promote sustainability within the profession. And so with that in mind, we executed efforts that fall into one of 4 unique categories that represent strategies aimed at attracting and retaining highly effective educators with embedded relevant support throughout the life cycle of an educator. And so we want to provide appropriate supports from the point of recruitment to retirement. And so the 4 areas of focus consist of recruitment, innovative preparation, diverse and learner-ready teachers,
and then grow your own initiatives. Each of these strategies, of course, work in concert to expand the educator pipeline in Mississippi. And so to fast forward, during summer 2018, we immediately began to engage education shareholders by way of focus groups that were conducted across our state to learn from those faced with the lack of opportunity, what they believe to be the root cause of their inability to gain entree into the profession. And for those that did enter, why they were choosing to leave after a short time served. And you'll find that what I'll share with you now as represents their responses aligns to what Jessica just shared with us. And so for those that couldn't gain access to the profession, they noted that it was because of lack of financial support or could not afford the cost of tuition, lack of access to transportation to the nearest institution, or no access to childcare. And most had difficulty achieving the qualifying passing scores on tests required for program entry or for licensure. And so for those who were able to enter and decided to leave for whatever reason, they noted or cited that their reason was they felt inadequately prepared or the lack of support. And so as we listened, we concluded that support, would have to be on a needs, based on the needs, of the individual candidate. And it was necessary to ensure support was provided at every facet of the continuum. And so in essence, there couldn't be a one-size-fits-all approach to the provision of support. And so hence, the following efforts were born. And so the first initiative I'd like to share is around recruitment. And so we established at the state level a teacher recruitment and support team to provide support to prospective educators, to educator preparation providers, and our local school districts. And so we established that a team of 4 teacher recruiters to serve each of the 4 congressional districts in the state of Mississippi, with the charge of facilitating the process of attracting, recruiting, and retaining specific target groups of prospective educators or teacher candidates while providing appropriate supports. And so those targets or targeted prospective teacher candidates included high school students through the expansion of teacher academy programs across the state, college students, targeting those college students with undecided or undeclared majors, transitioning professionals, military personnel transitioning from service, includes career changers, paraprofessionals, teacher assistants, and male educators of color. And so the aim is not to simply recruit prospective teachers to fill vacancies. Rather, we desire to recruit prospective candidates who understand the culture and context and have a vested interest in serving the children in local communities or school districts in which they will serve. And so while either of the recruiters would have been able to serve the needs of any congressional district, we're being intentional in recruiting each of the 4 or requiring each of the 4 recruiters to focus on and serve as liaison or point of contact for local school districts and institutions in one assigned congressional district. And some examples of the responsibilities they have is facilitating the development of partnerships between the local school districts, institutions, and the educator preparation program and recruitment faculty and staff, and appropriate education shareholders within the assigned congressional district for the purpose of co-constructing talent recruitment management and support plans that are based on the unique needs of that region of the state. And so in essence, we desire to differentiate our approach to meeting the needs of the various regions of our state, just as we differentiate instruction for our individual students. And so other roles include them conducting serving as dedicated licensure points of contact, or we have a dedicated call center to support candidates, virtual educator preparation information sessions that are conducted in collaboration with our educator preparation providers, and also virtual teacher career fairs in collaboration with our local school districts. And we also launched the Teach Mississippi campaign as a strategy for attracting candidates and giving our veteran teachers a voice to share positive messaging around our teaching profession. And so the second initiative is around innovative preparation. And so as we listened, we heard the concerns of our education shareholders with regard to affordability, lack of transportation, among other challenges raised during our focus groups. And that brings us to our second initiative, which is, again, regarding innovative preparation pathways to licensure. And so through philanthropic partnerships, we eliminated barriers or financial barriers to educator preparation for over 50 aspiring educators in our state-run Mississippi Teacher Residency pilot. And so the MTR pilot is grounded in both high-quality clinical practice and ongoing mentor teacher support. 76% of the MTR cohorts won, and 83% of MTR's cohort 2 identifies as educators of color, a rate that far exceeds the national average for educator diversity. We were able to retain over 100 experienced educators in our nation's first performance-based licensure pilot. The PBL pilot aims to explore alternative pathways to teacher licensure for educators who are making a positive impact on student learning, despite previous challenges with licensure test passage. And so 100% of PBL's cohorts 1 and 2 identify as educators of color, a rate, again, that far exceeds the national average for educator diversity. And so to provide additional options for gaining entree into the teaching profession, the members of our legislature enacted in 2020 a new program entrance requirement with the passage of a technical amendment to Mississippi Code Annotated 37.3-2, which expanded options for entrance into teacher education through a 3.0 grade point average. And so under development, with technical assistance being provided by our national partners, are the development of an induction license that will include a mentorship component to ensure novice teachers are receiving the necessary supports. We're still in the development and pilot phase of this initiative. We're also exploring teacher leadership and micro-credentials. We're working closely with national providers to strengthen our licensure renewal requirements. And so we're looking to move away from a mindset of compliance to a targeted professional learning approach that is based on the results of areas identified in need for improvement during observations while utilizing our professional growth system. With grant funding, Mississippi now benefits from 11 ambassadors who are working to raise awareness about national board certification, particularly for teachers of color and teachers in the Mississippi Delta region and other high needs regions in the state. The world-class teaching program provides guidance and support through teacher certification, the teacher certification process of teachers statewide. And those that complete the process, the national board process, will be able to take advantage of Mississippi's National Board Certification Teachers salary incentive of $6,000 for all NBCT teachers in Mississippi, and $10,000 for those who actually serve in one of 16 high needs counties. With the awesome facilitation provided by SREB team, we are engaged in the early ideation phase of completely overhauling and strengthening our current licensure structure to include a proposal for offering differentiated compensation, but we are still in early talks about that. And I'll end it here.
Thanks, Dr. Murphy. Just a reminder for folks, if you have questions for any of the panelists or presenters today, you can write them in the chat box or hit the raise your hand button. No questions have come through for you yet, Dr. Murphy. So I think we can move on to hear from, oh, here comes a question. I spoke too soon. From Holly Eaton, what performance instrument are you using for your performance-based licensure pilot?
Yes, ma'am. And so to start, the district will, they're required to actually be using or selecting one of STAR, NWA MAP, or iReady, ACT Aspire tested teachers and other instruments for the most part.
Great, and encourage more folks to ask Dr. Murphy some questions. We can come back. If you have any questions for him, let us know in the chat if it's specifically for him. But I think we'll go to our next panelist, Dr. Robyn Miller from the Oklahoma State Department of Education. And she's going to present with some ideas that have come out of their network group.
Thank you, Megan, and thank you, SREB, for allowing Oklahoma to establish this network and actually title it a network rather than a roundtable. So a little background, our state chief, Superintendent Joy Hoffmeister, commissioned a teacher shortage task force in 2015. So we already had established roundtables and working groups to pursue various policy practice efforts. So when we were invited to join SREB in this work, we identified a possible missing human capital link, which was connecting, networking with, and connecting school districts and regional educator preparation programs. So in selecting school district leaders, we intentionally looked for districts close to the borders of other states who were losing teachers to other states. And we already had, or we have actually in Oklahoma, a regional university system. And so representatives from those educator preparation programs were invited, where we at the state agency served or functioned as liaison between these two groups. So 6 members from each group. Next slide, please. So we made this mission clear to the invitees when reaching out via email. Our first meeting was held in November of 2019, which was in person. And we had planned many more in-person meetings. Very grateful to those university representatives for offering their campuses for future meetings. We were only able to actually meet in person at one campus before we had to move to all virtual meetings due to COVID-19. So over the 9 months, with SREB's help, we met with this group and added other state officials when necessary. So for example, representatives from our regents of higher education, representation from our educator preparation accrediting body, a separate entity from the Department of Education, and then school administrator membership organization. So in all, the vision was to assist in taking completers from Oklahoma educator preparation programs into Oklahoma classrooms with the necessary supports to retain them long-term. Next slide, please. So our conversations over the 9 months were centered around these two challenges: barriers to paid student teaching internship, which meant open and honest conversation about how to pay student teachers, which is currently allowable via Oklahoma state statute. But in these conversations, we discussed the language stating that student teachers may be paid after completion of 60 days of their internship. And in our minds, that defeats the purpose of a barrier that universities were telling us, which was that pre-service teachers were dropping out of their programs in that final student teaching block due to expense. So essentially, these student teachers needed compensation or stipend up front. There was also the conversation about the competitive nature of these kinds of programs and at the district level. So the competitive aspect of districts recruiting essentially graduates or student teachers into and hiring them into their school districts. So there was a lot of hesitancy and trepidation to participate. And from the educator preparation programs representatives, we were able to liaise that conversation related to program accreditation when it comes to student teaching clinical practice agreements that are to be in place between LEAs and Ed Prep. So all of this conversation was couched as a recruitment effort of qualified and effective talent in Oklahoma schools, which is an anchoring objective of our original 2015 teacher shortage task force. The second challenge this network addressed was the lack of support necessary to retain new teachers in the field. We're all aware of the research claiming the high retention or increased retention when new teachers engage in an induction program, not only in year 1, but also in year 2 and possibly even in year 3. So for context, Oklahoma has a history of strong induction from approximately the mid-1980s to 2010, when state funding for this program was cut. This network, this Oklahoma Educator Supply and Demand Network, built the recommendation to align mentoring with our professional learning focus, which is part of our teacher and leader evaluation system. Next slide, please. So outcomes of this network, equitable funding for the student teaching internship, the challenge number 1. So in order to address that challenge, amending the statutory language to remove that 60-day requirement, and establishing an Oklahoma statewide student teaching fund, a fund that is equitably managed and distributed, this being or seen as a cost of living stipend for student teachers. And then for the mentoring initiative, starting with a pilot program that would include several districts and eventually a well-established and sustainable statewide program. Ultimately, that effort would include instituting a new professional learning focus requirements to provide a 2-year quality mentorship to all first and second year teachers in our state. So specifically embedded in the professional learning focus mentoring initiative would be one-on-one peer teacher mentor through weekly mentoring interaction. Also a focus on highest need areas for early career teachers based on their individual needs and research. And then finally, funding is necessary to implement such a program, mainly to establish a group or a cadre of state-based coaches. So incentive funding to be applied to our lead and master certificate. In Oklahoma, we have our career ladder is a standard certificate, but then the potential for a lead certification and a master certification. So these are incentives to retain our veteran teachers. So everything in policy, practice, and programming, harkening back to our state recruitment and retention efforts already underway. So thank you again. I don't know if there are any questions, Megan, but I'm happy to take questions.
Yes, thanks, Dr. Miller. The first question that's come through is from Carrie Farrow. She asks, who manages the statewide student teaching fund and where does the money come from?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So in our network, this group over the last, or in that 9-month period, we talked about just the challenge really of distributing funds, but managing the funds and distributing funds not only equitably, but urgently. And sadly to say, you know, there are many state entities where that processing of stipends or funds is rather slow. So our thinking is that we might identify a nonprofit entity to actually manage. This would be a revolving fund where we would certainly ask all of our stakeholders and partners in this work to recruit and retain effective educators to contribute to that fund. So that's where we're hoping we will get dollars into that initiative.
The next question for you, Dr. Miller, is what was the impact of the student teaching internship? Do you have data that shows its effectiveness?
So really, we didn't have any districts that we know of that actually paid their student teachers. We have something a couple of years ago that entered into statute, basically, that allowed sort of on an emergency basis to contract with a student teacher and actually pay that student teacher for that service at the same time, obviously, the student teacher completing the program at the higher ed level. But that's not necessarily this particular initiative. So we really don't have data on true upfront payment of student teaching internship and how that might be a recruitment strategy and ultimately a retention strategy for districts.
So Dr. Miller, I'd like to follow that up with a question myself. Since this really is centered around having to change some of the policy to make sure that there's the flexibility to districts to do these payments up front, you know, as a recruiting tool and a potential retention tool then for the teacher candidates. You all have, you know, we've entered the legislative season here in most states. Have there been any discussions so far about the support from the legislature on, you know, moving forward with the paid student teaching changes and the funding?
Yes, we've had some early conversations, and then back in the fall, actually some interim studies that would make way for this kind of initiative. And actually in Oklahoma, we already have a couple of funding mechanisms or revolving funds. And one of those is a license plate fund that this would be certainly aligned with and actually could be this particular fund. I think to your question about any kind of state budgeted programs, we in Oklahoma have very little in our state budget when it comes to induction. What we currently have in place, and it's very successful, so we do have data on this, but we call it First Class Program, and it is a program for new teachers. And we have only been able to, in the last 3 years, address or support approximately 50 new teachers in a year. And so in presenting our budget, we would like to be able to either through that state budget or a revolving fund certainly enhance that program that we call First Class.
A question from Holly Eaton. Are there any thoughts regarding using federal Title II Part A funds to fund some of these initiatives?
Absolutely, and we've had that discussion. You know, we always want to make that awareness, at least the conversation when we're talking with our district leaders. So certainly we know we have our own SEA Title IIA funds, and it's allowable, but I think we found that many times our LEAs don't realize that they are able to use their Title IIA funds for these purposes as well.
Great. Well, thank you, Dr. Miller. It looks like that's all the questions for you right now. So I think we'll turn to our third and final panelist, Representative Collins from Alabama, and she's going to share some of the ideas coming out of their roundtable. For those who participated in the last webinar, you heard a little bit about this from Mark Dixon, the A+ Education Partnership Leader. And I believe, Representative Collins, you're going to focus in a little bit more on the supports and compensation piece, perhaps. So thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's good to be with you. I've had about a decade of working with SREB, and I find them to be really hard work when we're working together, but we come out with really good suggestions and pathways, and I appreciate their help very much. So they were just a wonderful asset as we approach this roundtable type. Ours followed, like Dr. Miller spoke, a teacher shortage task force. And so we took a lot of those recommendations and had actually already even implemented through law some of the recommendations that the shortage task force had done. But we wanted something that would go forward and work on, and I want to say this, I always called it our TQ square, because we focused on quantity and quality. And a lot of times the group that was working together would like, well, we want all certified teachers, we want all this. And we're like, well, yes, that's true. In that perfect world, we would like everyone prepared and certified and all that. But as you know, in a lot of our districts, that's been a challenge, finding and recruiting those. And so we tried to continue to keep our focus on increasing quantity and quality once we got there so we could keep them. So as you look at some of our goals, we wanted to lift that teaching professionalism. We've heard that from our teachers over and over again. They want to be treated more like professionals. They want to do that. So we wanted to implement some programs that were based on similar things from other professionals. And so we kind of concentrate on that, improving their conditions, increasing career paths. I heard Dr. Miller talk about a career ladder, and we didn't necessarily have that in place. And so that's kind of where we were going. Another just huge emphasis, and I know Dr. Murphy mentioned this, was increasing diversity in our teaching field. And we've seen through studies and some of the data that if you have even one teacher that looks like you through a period of a few years, it makes a huge difference on your learning and your achievement as a student. And so increasing that, simplifying that certification process. And in Alabama, we were really anxious also to improve our data collection and how we actually use that data. Jessica? So we wanted to create some pathways that would support and advance teachers for Alabama and create wins for them. We had heard, and through one of the providers who's been working with several states, they actually had some data that this new way of doing these pathways would increase student achievement, really strengthen learning. It added to the diversity because maybe sometimes in a classroom, you had younger teachers, you had intern teachers, you had substitute teachers even, you had teachers new to that pathway, and they were from that area, they were in that diverse area that increased that in that they lived in those communities, and that was really good. This new pathway creates more of a team approach, and we're going to talk, each kind of slide is going to lead into the next. So a lot of times I may say something and you may think of a question and I may actually get to it on the next slide just to kind of prepare you. But another win was to retain. It's very expensive to go and recruit and hire these teachers and work on preparing them to be a part of your, learning your LEA and your school system. And then in 3 or 5 years or less, you lose them and you have to start all over. And so retaining these teachers so that they feel better supported, that was important. But as we just mentioned in the last question for Dr. Miller, being able to make this feasible financially and sustainable was very important. And that's what one of the programs that we found, we feel like they're doing a good job with that. The actual process creates an intensive support for these early career people, and even sometimes a struggling career teacher, someone that's been there for a while, but because of all the changes, because of the things we're doing, they're not going through that process as smoothly and all. And so it also provides those early teachers, you know, a faster growth period. It gets them sustainable and feasible. That was kind of our goal. So here's kind of what our pilot's going to look like. We create a career continuum. So we've not really had that. And so we're excited about this concept. It is a year-long stipend paid teacher residency. And I'm going to explain how we're going to pay for that later on. But using those same early career intern, non-certified or alternate certified, new to this field, maybe they were in another career and they've moved over to be a teacher. Anyway, there are lots of reasons they could be in this residency program, but that it would increase the diversity. But we've seen data from other states that it increases the retention. They feel supported, so they stay longer in the field. All of the, this is through their mentorship. And one of the things we really liked is that every school system has these quality teachers, and we're talking about creating that lead and that master teacher, and that would then spread out that effectiveness and that quality to more than that just classroom students, but to other classrooms and to other teachers as they see just examples of how it can be done, and as they work with peer-to-peer, with mentoring, and with coaching to make it more effective. And so those lead and master teachers would actually touch more students in their schools than just the ones they're with. And it would also, we're going to need to create some new professional development and some micro credentials that would work with that. So looking at these advanced roles, which is the next one, 22 states have created these new teacher leader licenses, endorsements, some type of that micro credentialing. And so we've seen it work. And so we decided it would be best to test some of these pathways, to create some pilots that would actually create testing with that. Each of those schools are actually going to have, and we've decided it's going to take almost a year to actually review and revise how they do their budgets. Because the goal to make it sustainable is to use the current funding you have right now, whether that's a balance of federal funds, if you've got some title, state funding that's coming to you for your teachers and for your classrooms, and any local funding that you might be already using. And so, but using it differently. That's the best way I can say. And I'm going to go into some specifics that I think will clear that up later on. But you're also going to need to review your scheduling, your processes. If you're going to have to set up how your classrooms look, because they're going to be different, because in order to create time for a master teacher to move around in that mentorship and a lead teacher to actually guide some of the other teachers in the class in the school setting, you're going to have to change that timing and what that looks like. But even that peer-to-peer, that time together, we've seen how in other places it's actually increased that retention and all those things that we were looking for. And so there is an external group that we've heard, we've seen them, we've met and talked with them about, they call it, it's opportunity, trying to remember the name, culture model, but it's collective leadership, and you're actually building these master and these lead teachers too. And it is truly that career continuum that you're looking at, which is more of a professional model. we're going to need a new person in our state department that would guide that. We don't have one there that would be prepared. So what we would do in these 3-year pilots is learn from this external leader, this group that comes in and they work with those individuals, but have someone at that department that's learning. So as we believe our state will learn from these models like some of the others and have some of the success that we've seen in their data, we could then scale that up as we move forward. And so it's going to be very strategic, but we're kind of excited about it. The last slide I have is going to get into some of the specifics. And so I'm going to kind of walk through this, but the goal is to literally use the current funding that we have, but use it differently. And so what we're going to need too in our pilots, and I'm wanting you to think about this right now, is that you're going to have a school leader and a superintendent and a principal who's willing to think a little bit outside the box, not how it's always been, but how we could do it differently to make a better process. We're all thinking outside the box because of COVID right now, so it may be a perfect time to do this, especially if you are in one of those hard to reach areas. It could be very, very urban or very, very rural, and you're having trouble getting your math, your science, your CALT, your special needs, your all those hard to learn, gather professionals, teachers in those areas. And so this might help you if you could do it just a little bit differently. So those are kind of how we were talking about using your funding, but in a different way. These external experts would come in and work with these leaders in these schools to actually look at how they're budgeting now, where the money's coming from, and how they could do it. One of the things we're also doing that I think is going to be really interesting is that we already had, because while we didn't start with a lot of our higher education in our original roundtable, we realized we kept talking about that and they needed to be represented. So we actually added them to a second, third, and then all the rest of the meetings. Well, some of them were already anxious to start some programs like that. So we actually have some of our higher education programs working with our local school systems around that to do something kind of similar. So while we may have our 3 or 4 pilots working within this project and recommendation, we've also got some outside groups that would be doing something similar that would have their data also that we could compare. And as of this week, there's also even a local public charter school that's interested in maybe working with us outside. So they would have their data to work on how that works. So we feel like between all of these mixtures, we're going to have a lot better data at the end to see what's worked and how we can make it. It's not a pilot that we know exactly what it's going to look like today. Recruiting is probably going to be challenging, but if you're having trouble recruiting quality teachers and you're having shortage of teachers, I know I heard someone say this last weekend at a conference that they had no certified math teachers in their system. Well, those are the kind of areas that we need you to think outside the box, and let's try to recruit someone in and build a pathway and a career continuum that would make that work. So that's kind of what we're thinking. So we realize up front that first of all, to have this expert come in is going to have a cost. We realize up front that we may, before we learn how to use our current balances, what we've heard is that if you're in a title school or you're in a very affluent community, you may have some extra dollars that you can do, but those middle of the pack, those not getting title dollars and those not getting a lot of local funding, they're going to be the ones that struggle the most. And so we understand we're willing as a legislature to possibly put some funding into this as we do these pilots to see if we can make them sustainable on their own. But some of the ways we're realizing in the cost is it may be about $1 million to get the group to start 3 or 4 really good pilots using a little bit larger school system and some smaller ones, urban, rural, to get a good balance. So we see that. Also, we realize in our pay, as we pay our lead and master teachers, as we work into that area, they might actually need what we would call a bonus in our state. we already try to pay if you teach in a hard to teach a failing school district, a very rural area where we're having a hard time, we have a bonus for that. If you are teaching math or science in those areas, there's a bonus on top for that. We are trying to develop a new incentive. If you get your CALT, your for language, to help our reading improve, we have incentive for that. So we use our current matrix, but we also are already building some bonuses on top of that. So while we may have to start with that, we're hoping we learn how to do it within that current balance that we're doing. And I may explain how that works. And so look at the bottom of the little green box. If you were one of those early career, whether you're new to the field, you're an intern, we would like a year-long residency that's not based on our starting salary necessarily. And just for math purposes, I'm going to say that's $40,000. But these young professionals would start at, and I'm going to just use that top figure, $25,000. So that's more than some of them were getting paid when it was a zero. You were just doing this as a part of your college preparation program. Or but you would be a part of the benefits. You would be starting to earn some different things like that. Well, if a starting salary for rounding purposes is $40,000 and you're paying that early teacher $25,000, you've got $15,000 to work with. So let's say you want a master teacher and you're going to rearrange how your classrooms are set up, and that master teacher's going to have time away from her classroom to actually make a difference in a mentoring and a coaching with others. Well, they're going to, for that extra work, they're going to get a bump, and let's just round that 3 to 7 to 5. So now you've got $5,000 of that extra money accounted for that you are already going to be using in your structure. But now you're actually giving a bonus of your current funding to that master teacher. And then you have a lead teacher in your system who's organizing this, who's making kind of all the trains run on track, on the right track at the right time. They're doing a lot more, an additional mentoring, but these are your superstar teachers that you want their influence in all the different classrooms along. And so what we would like to see, maybe they're actually earning that $10,000 bonus for structuring that school. And so that's kind of how we envision it. We know up front there are going to be some cost while we bring in that external expert and while we're building that expertise within our department so that we could scale it. We know in every state, I know we say that a lot on some of the different conferences I'm on, if you've seen one state, then you've seen one state. And so we know it's going to look different in our state. And so how that works in that 3-year pilot, where we plan that first year, we start and we learn lessons that second year. And then that third year, we really anticipating a lot of those costs to go down because we will have learned how to make that sustainable as we move forward. And then hopefully we're working within our own budgets of each of those systems, but we're also gaining more diverse career people into the career of teaching. We're keeping them because they feel a strong mentorship. And then we're rewarding our teachers of excellence. They're doing more work, but they're making a bigger and bigger difference, and they're staying in the classroom. And so that's kind of how we are envisioning these pilots work. And it's going to be a little different, but I'm excited to continue to talk about it, explain it, and hopefully recruit our pilot schools to start participating. And I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thanks, Representative Collins. A couple quick questions have come through for you here.
Okay.
Holly Eaton says, I'm curious what intensive supports will be available for struggling teachers who aren't early career teachers. Glad to see the focus on retention throughout the pipeline.
Me too. I was too. And that's why I wanted to put on the slide I included, it's not just for early, but it's also for struggling. You know, there may be some, like I mentioned with COVID or something, that are not, but they would be a part of that entire team concept. So a struggling teacher is not going to be your master teacher or your lead teacher. They may be someone that's been there, but they've just had trouble with whatever issue it is. I know one of the things we talked about earlier were, and I think Jessica was mentioning it, in the teacher supports of that holistic work. maybe because of what they've gone through or just what's been happening in their school, there's actually some mental health issues. There are all kinds of reasons where you would have a struggling person. And so those master teachers and those lead teachers would be working with all of the teachers. There's not going to be an area that would be excluded. That would be a part of that team process, and that would be a part of that continuum. And so they would also get that same benefit of working with these master and lead teachers as the early career. I think that answers the question.
A question from Carrie Farrow. If you pay the teacher resident, do they still pay tuition?
I would say that they would, because if they're a resident and they're still in that college of education and they're going through that last year and all, it would be, they would be paying for their school, and their school would still be monitoring some of their process, but they would have the advantage of working with that local system, working with those master and lead teachers. And so it would actually benefit them. But that is also why, you know, a lot of those programs, they're not getting anything right now. If they're a substitute teacher, they're not getting, you know, a stipend. It's very small. These are people that are moving into this career path and they're on a process, but maybe they've not completed it or they've just started it and they're graduating. So we would, everything we've heard in all of the studies, I did a teacher preparation collaboration anyway with SREB a few years ago, and every single one talked about they need so much more support at the first than they're getting, but you're asking that support from a teacher that's got their own classroom. So restructuring that is how we anticipate that we'd be able to help early career, and then paying for those while they're going through that process and they're becoming, that also starts that professionalism.
We have about 30 seconds left and two questions that are very linked. So I'm going to try and link them together for you, Representative Collins, okay. Here. Can you quickly share any differentiation between the lead and master teachers, and how are those roles different from an instructional coordinator at a school?
It's a great question, and I'm a legislator and a past banker, so there may be some pieces I'm not connecting here, but here's how I would understand it too. That's why that external group that understands the process and has been working with them is so important. We're not going to be able to wing this or do this on our own. It's going to look completely different. The way I've understood as I've gone through the master program and I have my report, Alabama with our roundtable did a report, and if you look in that report, it's going to have a lot more specific guidelines on what that master looks like, what those extra things would be included that they would be doing, and then what that lead. My best description of it in just these few seconds is to say that that master, in my mind, is more like a coach. They would have some time away where an aide or someone was with their classroom and they were moving on to do that coaching with someone else, maybe one more. And then your lead teacher is kind of over that whole program, and they're working with all of the different teachers in different ways. And they would have less time in their personal classroom, but maybe some others. And this outside group has a model. They explained it a lot better than I did. And I would really encourage you looking at the Alabama Roundtable report, because I believe we did a really good job on the report explaining that probably better than I just did.
Thanks, Representative Collins. I think the key difference is really that master teachers and lead teachers, both as you know, different kinds of leaders within the school and this collective leadership approach, they are still teaching, whereas most instructional coordinators are no longer actively teaching in the classroom. And so that's a very key difference.
Very key, that they're still hands-on in front of those children. They've got a group that they are considered their children still, but they're all working together in this team process. And from my past background, I think that team process always makes a difference and works well. And I'm really anxious to see how these pilots move forward and how they work feet on the ground, feet in the classroom, working together in a school system.
Great. Thank you, Representative Collins, and thank you for the other panelists. We'll still potentially have a couple minutes to have some more questions here at the end, but our SREB team wanted to take a few minutes this morning to talk a little bit more about teacher compensation. As you've heard, a theme throughout from the folks here from our 3 roundtable states, as well as the North Carolina roundtable, all have a concentration on teacher compensation. Are we compensating teachers for the right kinds of things? You know, lots of states are based on inputs. All of these states are talking a little bit more about basing compensation more on output measures, as well as expanding compensation to folks like teacher residents, apprentices, student teachers, and restructuring teacher compensation for those advanced role teachers. At SREB, we've been doing some research on teacher compensation in general. Just what is the data showing around how teachers are compensated today? What are the effects of the compensation methods and amounts that states are using? And also, importantly, compensation is not just salaries. Compensation is also our benefits packages that we're giving to teachers. Are they really better than other professions? And so we wanted to do some study of that. So Jessica's going to take us through some key takeaways of our research real quick. And we have a few quick recommendations for states at the end as well. So Jessica.
Thanks, Megan. So as Megan has mentioned, compensation is part of the puzzle to help solve the teacher shortage crisis. So at SREB, we have come up and put out this SREB compensation dashboard. I'm hoping that some of you have taken the time to look at it, but if not, it's always there. I believe Megan shared the link in the chat earlier. So our team has put together a first of its kind central database on teacher compensation. This data dashboard, which launched last month, shows the data on teacher salaries, health benefits, retirement benefits, and then that full package outcome effect on what our teachers are taking home in their pockets. We are currently working to add additional context data on teacher demographics, licensure, recruitment, and more to be published in February. So far, this data dashboard houses 2018 to 2019 teacher compensation data. As data is released each summer, our team will load in the teacher salary, health, and retirement data for 2019, 2020, and beyond. I'd like to show you some of the key takeaways from this data. SREB is making this data available for the first time to help legislators and policymakers as they prepare for the 2021 session discussions on budget and salaries. Education researchers, advocates, and educators themselves will also be interested in seeing this data. So some takeaways from our dashboard around teacher salaries include that the teacher average national salary in constant dollars is lower than in the 1980s, and many SREB average salaries are as well. The average salary for teachers in the SREB region was around $53,000, and that compares to around $62,000 nationally. Teachers in the South are paid nearly 21% lower on average than professionals with similar education levels. That's worse than the national teacher wage penalty of 19%. Average teacher salaries in the 2018-19 school year were so low that in 3 SREB states, mid-career teachers as head of household for a family of 4 can qualify for 5 or more government assistance benefits. Some takeaways from our teacher health benefits section on the SREB teacher compensation dashboard. Our teacher health benefits are generally better and have more quality coverage than other professions. Health coverage's cost for employee-only coverage is lower than other professions, but family coverage tend to cost more for teachers than those in other professions. On average, costs for teachers the premiums for family coverage are higher than for other professions. All SREB states offer 2 or more state-sponsored health plan options, including at least 1 PPO program and 1 HMO or high deductible health plan option. Maryland is the only exception, as they offer health benefits through districts and not through state level. When you go into our SREB dashboard and click on a state, this is what you'll see for the health benefits section. For our teacher retirement benefits, some of our takeaways are that all states offer defined benefits or pension plans, and most SREB states have multiple pension tiers with benefits that differ depending on a teacher's hire date. 5 states offer defined contribution plans or hybrid plan options. Not all teachers will be able to save more for retirement in pension plans than in those investment plans. In many of the SREB states, teachers have no choice in their retirement benefit plan or investments. Some states offer teachers more control over those investments, which is typically better for teachers who don't stay in the profession for their entire careers, which is happening more often and in almost every career field these days. If you go onto our SREB dashboard and click on a state and a plan for retirement, this is some of the information that you will see. It tells you what type of plan it is, the benefit formula, as well as some interesting statistics that SREB has found through their research. Now, all of this comes to a conclusion with the teacher take-home pay. SREB analyzed what the average teacher brings home in their first, 15th, and 35th year of teaching to see examples of net salaries after paying for some of those constant deductions. We deducted state-specific required retirement contributions, health insurance premiums, and taxes to get to the net pay for some teachers. Florida is one of the leading states in our region for take-home pay, in addition to our most northern states of Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia. This is a screenshot from the dashboard showing take-home pay calculations in Florida. When viewing this in the dashboards, you can see the assumptions made to calculate these typical take-home pay averages if you hover over the little asterisk to see the assumptions. So with our dashboard, we hope that you can look at the whole teacher compensation package and see how your state may be doing and find places in policy to help compensate teachers better.
Thanks, Jessica, for those quick takeaways. There's certainly a lot of detailed state-by-state numbers within this dashboard, and we're always welcome and happy to take questions or look into more information for you all as folks dive into this data. I wanted to share a couple quick recommendations for folks as we've gone through the data and looked at innovative ideas coming out of different states, as well as what research and evidence-based information is telling us. How can our states move forward on teacher compensation? It's a really tricky subject matter, certainly political, and of course we have issues with COVID-19, revenue shortages and the like. So we've tried to come up with, again, separating out recommendations and low-cost solutions, moderate cost solutions, and even some potential cost-saving ideas. So really quickly, as we featured a few ideas here on teacher supports, it's very necessary and very beneficial for states to think about increasing their supports to teachers, whether that be through professional development or the more impactful mentorship programs that some states are looking into, building up their ability to be more rigorous and be more individualized for teachers. Another innovative idea coming out of a few states is thinking about offering actual stipends to teachers for professional development. Most teachers pay for this out of pocket, and offering small stipends for teachers along with a map of where quality professional development can be found can be very beneficial and a low-cost solution. Another thought that we've mentioned here today is thinking about hiring support staff so teachers can focus on instruction, and there are other qualified folks such as counselors, nurses, or other support staff to assist. That can certainly be a lower cost piece than increasing salaries overall. And then also planning and preparing for major compensation increases. This is something all states can and should be doing right now as you know, we're waiting for revenues to increase or tackling other issues with COVID-19 and the pandemic. We can plan ahead and think about the cost saving, high cost solutions that can have more greater impact later on. Some of those ideas include thinking about legislatively mandating cost of living salary increases. It's a misnomer for most practitioners, at least, and some other education leaders, that step increases on state salary schedules are cost of living increases. And this is not true. In fact, through our research, we found that only one state in the nation offers a mandated cost of living increase, and that's Washington State. Others are legislated, and you know it takes the will of politicians in the political process to ensure that a cost of living increase happens for our teachers. And obviously that's you know, very difficult in a lot of places, but we are seeing a rise in salary increases overall in our region as well as around the country. Another high cost solution is covering the increase in cost of health insurance and lowering those employee family premiums, which we noted are actually higher for teachers than other professions by about $200 actually. So preparing for health insurance costs to rise, because they certainly are not going to go down, and trying to figure out how to boost the state contributions to those family premiums. Then looking at revising teacher salary schedules as a whole. This is something that is coming out of our roundtables in North Carolina, in Mississippi, and perhaps will be discussions in Alabama in the future after their pilot. Thinking about really significantly raising those starting wages to compete with other industries in your state, and then incentivizing teachers who are increasing their effectiveness in the classroom and taking on those extra responsibilities in the advanced teacher kinds of roles. And it's always important to think of cost saving solutions. So we wanted to offer a couple of those for you really quickly today. One thing, in considering retirement contributions, which are a huge cost to states, is to think about offering a choice to the teachers. Most states offer solely defined benefit or pension plans for teachers, which are an incredible benefit, especially to those who are teaching between 8 and 25 years. But teachers who teach fewer than 8 years, and actually teachers who teach longer than 25 years, can save more in a defined contribution plan or 401k plan, which is not well known for a lot of people. So consider offering an option and a choice to your teachers to be able to pick from a defined contribution plan or continue on with their pension or defined benefit plan. Those teachers who will choose defined contribution plans, of course, that will cap your unfunded liabilities, and you'll be able to save longer in the long term from your state contributions to those pieces. Another cost saving solution that states could consider, and I know some states are considering, is only covering retiree health benefits up to age 65 once Medicare takes over. Actually, we've seen some states go even further and decide to not cover retiree health benefits at all for newly hired teachers. And while that may be unattractive to some states because those benefits could be a recruitment tool perhaps, although the research really isn't there to prove that it is. But one thing states could do is cover those retiree health benefits just to age 65, and then Medicare takes over. So it's some very quick information here for you on complex and intricate topics, but We hope it sparked your interest, and you all will take a look at the dashboard, as well as a report on some recommendations for teacher compensation that we've put out in the last few months. Obviously, we know that teacher compensation packages, improving those are not going to solve teacher shortages alone. Our webinar series here, I think, made that point that solving teacher shortages has to be a holistic view of all of the problems, looking at the teacher career continuum from beginning to end, making sure that we're opening pathways, breaking down the walls and the barriers for our teachers, supplying better educator preparation programs and different options within that, extending our clinical experiences, providing better supports and mentorship for all of our teachers, especially early career and struggling teachers, increasing the professional development and feedback for folks, offering those career ladders and advancement opportunities to folks leading from the classroom. All of these things are important, and that's really what's going to work to solve our teacher shortage problem. But the compensation piece is a tool, and it certainly is going to be increasingly more so a tool for recruiting the newer generations into teaching, who do cite low pay as their #1 reason for not entering the teaching profession. So we encourage folks to certainly continue to look at teacher compensation and to think about that as part of a holistic package with upgrading, if you will, your teacher career continuums and career ladders. So we have just a couple minutes left. Happy to take any questions from our attendees for any of our panelists or SREB staff. I don't see any in the chat box yet, so I'll pause for just a moment, see if anyone has any final questions or wishes to ask a question aloud. You can press that raise your hand button. If not, I have linked into the chat box multiple pages on our website where you can find our reports, our dashboard, as well as the recordings to the past webinars if you're interested in those topics and our previous speakers. We encourage you all to check those out, and also lean on the SREB team at any point in time. Contact us with any questions or ways to connect to folks in the Roundtable states if you have questions for them, and for our panelists. They're, of course, would be happy to share more on their ideas that they've previewed for you guys here today and or others in the previous webinars. So one final thank you to our panelists. If you all have any concluding remarks, welcome to take those now. Otherwise, thank you all for attending. And we hope you guys have a really great rest of your week.
Thank you. I do recommend heartily the dashboard. The dashboard is amazing, especially if you're contemplating making some changes. Seeing what some others are doing is very helpful. So thank you.
Thanks, Representative Collins. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Bye.